Of course, he needs no introduction. Joel-Skousen, his uncle wrote The Naked Communist and The Naked Capitalist, really expanding our paradigm of political understanding. He's the editor-in-chief of World Affairs Brief, worldaffairsbrief.com, political scientist, also a fighter bomber pilot, and a lot more. I won't go through his entire bio because of time constraints. He has a huge breaking analysis. Lord James to the House of Lords. I laundered money for IRA. Terrorism conspiracy in the UK involving Bank of England. All of this on the heels of the German bomb last week being a U.S. drill. So were the printer cartridges, folks. The British said they weren't bombs. Obama said, hey, we know they're bombs. Check them again. I mean, slap the cuffs on right there, folks. They're doing this out in the open. Now, you've got all these Obama and Clinton advisors saying Obama needs terror. They're saying it on Meet the Press. They're saying it in the Financial Times of London. They are really gearing up. And they see this huge protest against the TSA and this act of domination. They know that they're going to let this grow up to a crescendo, then stage events, and say, we don't ever want to hear any complaints. You cause deaths, even though more people die each year from honeybee stings than from terror. So I wanted to get Joel-Skousen's take on government-sponsored terror first, what's happening with the TSA, and how that dovetails with Glenn-Beck. Geraldo Rivera came out twice in the last week and said 9/11 could be an inside job, that Building 7 may have been a controlled demolition, that 9/11 truth may not be despicable now. Why is Rupert Murdoch greenlighting that? Beck has come out and directly said Obama's people are getting ready for a new Oklahoma City bombing to be blamed on Beck. And, of course, in those reports they're issuing, they blame yours truly as well. But Beck says he's the center of the universe. The point is a major shift. Joel, we're going to break in about 6 minutes, but you've got the floor on this constellation of issues that orbit each other. Break down what you see happening right now.
Well, let's talk about the TSA thing first. It's very important for listeners to understand the two provocations that gave TSA all of the excuse and justification to go through taking your shoes off. That was the shoe bomber. The crotch bomber gave us these backscatter X-ray naked scanners, as we call them. But both of those provocations were absolutely false terrorism. There is no way that an actual trained terrorist would not know that you cannot light plastic explosives with a match and expect it to blow up. And that happened in both cases of the shoe bomber and the crotch bomber. They had no blasting cap in there. I mean, if you're going to light it with a match, you would have stuck a blasting cap in it and said, light the fuse on the blasting cap.
And the government helped both of them get on the planes. That's on record.
Absolutely. So I am convinced that if, in fact, the American people, and there's a major backlash against this groping-type pat-down and against the scanners, that their only solution is to throw another false terrorist attack to show us, look, we've got to have these things, so everyone ought to shut up. And I think that's exactly what's coming. They will not take no for an answer. Now, one of the things that I'm most concerned about, I pointed out in my World Affairs Brief this past Friday's issue, is that I think there's a trend here. I'm very, very worried that they're violating a major rule they've had a long time, that you don't bother the majority of American people too much or there'll be a backlash. And they are clearly at the airports bothering the majority of American people, and they're getting a backlash. So why would they go against their own general rules against initiating a backlash? I mean, even John Pistole, in talking to Congress, was just defiant. Am I sensitive? Yes. Am I going to change anything? No.
So they're getting us ready to unveil the American people as the enemy.
Well, yes, that's true. But there's another catch-22 here, and that's what happened with the pilots. The pilots had a legitimate reason not to have to go through these scanners. I mean, if you can't trust the pilots with the airplane, who have background checks, who are authorized to carry firearms in the airplane, then who can you trust? So they
plus, once they're in the airplane, as you know, sir, and you're a pilot yourself, a fighter pilot, once you're in the airplane, a 747, 940-something thousand pounds, the biggest missile you can get, it's asinine.
Absolutely true. And so what happens, they entered into secret negotiations with the Obama administration this week, and the Obama administration, seeing this bullet coming that they could not sustain making pilots going through this obnoxious security stuff, they offered them a deal that if you agree to give us biometric scans.
Yes.
So that we have a biometric ID that will let you off the hook. Now, I think there's a possibility they may offer this to the American people.
Oh, you're right. They already did it. They said, don't worry. By next year, we'll have trusted traveler. If you go through, and then that sets the precedent that the government authorizes travel or not, and basically legitimizes and standardizes the no-fly list.
That's exactly right. And I think it's something that people will jump at. It's a pure Hegelian dialectic. You create enough tension, then you say, we give you an out. It's, and you'll jump at it because it's so much better than being groped by TSA. And I think that's what they're setting us up for.
I can totally concur with you, and your gut is already confirmed. You must have missed it. They are now actually announcing this. And TSA, going back to Homeland Security head Ridge about 7 years ago, he said, you will have not just a no-fly list, a no-buy list, a no-job list. You'll have to have this card and biometrics to do everything. And then that's the true cashless society control grid. Then they claim any underground economy is now associated with terrorism.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. And as I say, they're using this type of false flag terrorism in order to drive all of this. But I do feel that we're going to get some other kind of terrorist attack here. It's just been a long time, and not only is skepticism growing about 9/11, but it's also enraged now about the TSA, and so they've got a problem here.
I'm going to skip this network break, so stations should stay with us. This is a network break we're skipping because I want to give Joel more time today. Joel, before we get into Beck and then into the larger issue, this government-sponsored terror in England hidden in plain view, it's just amazing, and the same strategy of tension. What are your ideas, then, to preemptively deal with them staging a new attack? What do you think my millions of listeners, from your perspective, should be doing to head them off at the pass?
Well, it's very difficult to develop a strategy because, the stuff works on the dumbed-down Americans. But what we really need to help people understand is that there's a pattern of false flag terrorism. That's why conspiracy analysis is so important, not only about 9/11, but about just what I said about the crotch bomber and the shoe bomber. The fact that you have supposedly sophisticated trained terrorism, that learn to fly airplanes, 757s on Cessnas, which is an impossibility, I can tell you that as a pilot. And you have crotch bombers that don't know that you can't light and explode. This is what's going to happen again. There's going to be another terrorist attempt, not an attack, probably an attempt, and those are the things that are most easily to develop. So we've got to train people to know the answers, particularly about how to identify false terrorism versus true terrorism. But, what we're talking about in this week's World Affairs Brief, we very rarely get open admissions of conspiracy. And we've got 3 blockbusters now. We have the admission of James Jones at the Munich Security Conference that Henry Kissinger gives daily marching orders to the National Security Council.
And that wasn't a joke. He said, I get my orders from Mr. Kissinger.
Yeah, and he said, filter down through Brent Scowcroft and Sandy Berger, who are here with us today. I mean, this was just no mistake. This was too many specifics, and it's right out in the open. The number 2 one, of course, was the one the whistleblower out of the City of London, which I covered on May 7th in my World Affairs Brief. This didn't get much coverage in the press, but it was a blockbuster one. Here's this guy in the City of London who is a major financier. Now, the City of London, remember, is a city within a city. This is not the metropolitan government of London. This is the ancient medieval City of London government.
It's just like the Vatican or the District of Columbia. Right. These globalists always create their own above-the-law command base.
That's right. And this is where all of the financial manipulation of the Anglo-American society with Bank of England happens in the City of London. All right. He was a major financial advisor. He met 30 times a year with all the other major financial powers that be within the City of London. But he was not part of the powers that be system. But he mistakenly got invited to a meeting, since he'd been with these same people. He got into the meeting. These are the same people he'd been meeting with for months and years. And all of a sudden, 3 other high British officials come in. They sit down, and they immediately start talking about conspiracy issues, about war, inducing China or inducing a war with Iran and inducing Israel to strike Iran in order to get the West involved in a war with Iran. And he was just shocked out of his chair. He says, here they're talking as if we're all initiates, and I'm not one of them. But they all think I am.
And when he went public on the silver manipulation, well, go ahead.
That's right. Well, in other words, his story finding, now this happened in 2003. It took him this long to finally decide, after he studied conspiracy issues, tried to make heads or tails of what he was hearing. He came out and gave an interview where all of this came out. And that was a major story that bolsters not only our suspicion that an attack on Iran is coming, but that Israel will be the provocation. Also interesting in that story, it's the first time I've ever found anyone coming out of the inside powers that be and confirm my theory. I'm the only one on this planet that has the theory in this next World War III scenario, whereby Russia and China will strike the West. And I said the way that the West will beat Russia, even after absorbing a nuclear first strike, will be that they'll get China to betray Russia and attack its rear. And he came out in that very same interview. He said, in that meeting, he said, I couldn't make heads or tails of what this meant, but they talked about inducing China to attack Russia during the next war so that they could help win the war. And he didn't know what that meant.
And that's why there's this deep alliance between the Anglo-Americans and China. That's why they give them the Panama Canal, give them all the jobs, let them buy all the debt, let them buy up the oil refineries here in the U.S. because they're strategic partners.
That's correct.
I agree. I see all the signs there, and I see the CFR calling it the Chinese century. They've clearly made this decision back in the 70s.
But the big story, and this is the number 3, we had the James Jones, we had this whistleblower out of the city of London, and now we're coming out of London with Lord James Blackheath. Let me set the stage. Here, this is the House of Lords, no press allowed, this is private, this is what allows a person to make these kinds of statements. So he starts talking to the House of Lords, this is Lord James of Blackheath, about the fact that there's a super secret, powerful foundation or operation in the world that deals at the highest government levels. He says, I will call it Foundation X. He's talking to the House of Lords, and he says, they contacted me, and they suggested or offered to loan the British government enough money to take care of its debt, and the British government would then be indebted to them instead of to the world and the IMF and all of those debt things.
And that even came out in mainstream news. That was so incredible. Secret foundations will fund your whole government.
That's right. Now, the most interesting thing is here, and this only got coverage of the Belfast Telegraph, because they're very much involved in what happened with the IRA, is that someone in the House of Lords protests and says, look, Lord Blackheath, there's no way that they would contact you. They only talk to heads of state. In other words, this is a guy in the House of Lords who knew about this, and a lot of other people apparently knew about this secret organization that had all this power. They said they wouldn't be talking to you. And so what Lord James does in rebuttal is said, what do you mean? He says, I'm a bigger wig than you think in this stuff because I helped launder billions of pounds for the IRA through the Bank of England. That's why they would talk to me. And all of a sudden there was a major gasp, as here he is, Lord James, admitting that the Bank of England was involved in laundering money for the IRA to fund terrorism in IRA.
Amazing.
And right there in the open, of course, there's no press there, but there were obviously leaks coming out of this. But here he even said, and we laundered money for the African terrorists. He says, I can't talk about that because that's still a security issue. But you see, ever since it blew wide open a couple of years ago, that Kevin Maguire, number 2 security in the IRA, was a British agent.
Steak Knife and others. We interviewed some of these people, and then later they were killed. But it was confirmed that for decades, for those that don't know, just recapping, that the entire command leadership of the violent arm of the IRA was really British Special Forces and MI5 and MI6 continue.
Well, and the key point about that is that because it got blown wide open that the IRA was a British operation, and I even covered in the World Affairs Brief how the CIA had shipped rockets and missiles and even a dismantled helicopter in a C-130 over to the IRA, and the whistleblower blew the whistle. I mean, this is a government operation, this entire terrorism of the IRA, so they dismantled it.